Coldfish is based on the case of a professional dog breeder, pet shop owner named Sekine Gen and his wife Kazuma Hiroko, who over an 11-year period killed at least 10 people, maybe more. Except Coldfish is about dealing in rare fish, and in real life they were dealing with rare dogs and rare animals. In my book, I think I've devoted about 2 chapters to what were originally called the Saitama Dog Lover Serial Disappearances, which later became the Saitama Dog Lover Serial Killings. Sekine Gen was a dog breeder, a pet breeder in Saitama Prefecture. As early as 1984, people around him started disappearing. The police launched an investigation. They were never able to get anything. In 1993, a Korean-Japanese businessman named Kawasaki bought some very expensive dogs from Sekine and felt that he'd been ripped off. He demanded his money back. He came over to the house. They gave him a sports drink, a stamina drink. He drank it and he died because it was poisoned. It was strychnine, so it was a very painful death. They took the body up to Gunma. They dismembered it. They burned the bones. They burned the flesh. They made sure that there was nothing left. Of course, the family became concerned. They came to visit his office. Sekine told them, I gave him back his money, and we went up to Soapland, and he was with some girl, and he's probably ran off with her, which was a complete lie. That's when the Saitama police really began their investigation. The next to go was Endo Yoshinobu and his driver, Wakui. Endo was a member of the Inagawa Kai Takaragumi, a local crime group. One of the things that's curious about Saitama is that at the time the Yakuza were very entrenched in Konan-machi. So entrenched that actually the Takada and Endo ran for mayor of the city and didn't do so bad in the polls. But they weren't elected mayor, and I think they were later arrested for violations of the election laws. So it tells you a little bit about the place. Endo realized that Sekine had killed Kawasaki and began blackmailing him. Sekine was doing a very good business in rare animals. He was taking out full-page ads in all the pet journals, and he was popularizing the Alaskan Malamute as the dog for rare breeders to have. So he was making money hand over fist. He was on television. He was telling people that he'd lived in the wilds of Africa, and that that he would go there to bring back these rare animals. And people believed it because he was very charismatic. He was a very smooth talker. I mean, you could be out on a rainy day and Sekine could probably convince you that the sun was shining. He was so smooth. And he did have this sort of animal magnetism to him that was impressive. However, beneath that was a very violent person. As soon as Kawasaki's family went to the police and told them that their husband had been dealing with Sekine and had vanished, they told him he's as good as dead. Because they knew that around this guy people kept disappearing, but there was no evidence. Endo and Wakui, he met with them, and God knows why they would do this, but they drank the sports drinks that he offered him. Yumko is the name of it, and they both died. By this time, Sekine had an assistant who wrote this book, Shima. And Shima wasn't a part of the killings, but he was there when, he may have been there when Kawasaki died as well. He was definitely there when Endo and the driver died. And being present at the scene of a murder, he already felt that he was an accomplice and couldn't get out. So he did exactly what Sekine told him to do. So they went up, he drove the car, they went up and disposed of the 2 bodies there, just like they disposed of the other bodies and probably many bodies before, in a little shack in Gunma, chopping up the flesh, burning the bones, scattering the ashes, and then they killed one more woman who was a middle-aged woman who had bought a dog. She was also not happy with the deal that she'd gotten and threatened to go to the police and file charges for fraud, so they killed her as well. That was number 4. Saitama police started their investigation in 1993. It was done very quietly, very hush-hush, because they didn't want him to destroy any more evidence. We all knew about it. I mean, every newspaper knew that the police were working in this case. None of the major newspapers broke the story until this tabloid magazine on the 19th of 1994 was the first to run a story about it. And then we all kind of debated at the Yomiuri Shimbun where I was working, and it's all written here, is like, should we run the story now? I mean, now that it's out, should we sit on it? And in retrospect, we should have sat on the story because, I mean, nobody pays attention to sports newspapers. I mean, their credibility is zero. But we did run a story which totally pissed off the police and really ruined our relations with them working on this story to some extent. I came on to the story as a reporter. I was covering organized crime because one of the organized crime investigators, who was kind of my mentor, Detective Sekiguchi, was loaned to the homicide squad to see what happened to Endo and his driver. So since it was such a major case, you know, amongst the 9 reporters that were on the Yomiuri staff, we all were assigned to cover like a victim. There was someone covering the Kawasaki family. There was someone covering the housewife that had disappeared. And I covered Endo. So that meant that I started talking to all the Yakuza that know him. I hunted down his 18-year-old mistress at a hostess bar, started dating one of her friends, and, you know, kept following the case. What eventually happened is that Takada Kumicho, the head of the Takada Gumi, decided that, yeah, Sekine had probably killed one of his guys. And he decided that he was going to actually kill Sekine. And at one point he actually kidnapped Sekine and had Sekine in his office and called up Detective Sekiguchi and says, I've got Sekine here, I'm going to torture him until he confesses and I'm going to kill him. And Detective Sekiguchi said, that wouldn't be a very good idea because I'd have to arrest you. Why don't you take your time and ask him some questions, but please return him alive. But Sekine did not break down. So the Saitama police decided that they would try and get him on separate charges of fraud involving the building of his dog kennel, but that case filtered out. So they really weren't getting anywhere until Takada Gumi decided to launch their own sort of Yakuza investigation, and basically they started rounding up everybody who knew Sekine and worked with them, torturing them and threatening them until they got some good information. And they managed to get a tape of Sekine discussing what had happened to the people in very obtuse terms, in which he referred to sort of the logs as being invisible. Like, there's no problem because the logs are invisible. He used definitely a code word, but in context, everyone understood. Okay, he's made these bodies impossible to find. And one of the tape recordings that the Yakuza themselves took implicated Shima, the driver, in the disposal of the bodies. The Yakuza took that tape and gave it to the police. And then the police knew that if we arrest Shima, who is basically Shamoto in this film, we will have a case. So they arrested him on separate charges and then got him to confess to disposing and dismembering the bodies, and basically said, we'll let you walk on charges of murder if you cooperate. The Saitama police later retracted that deal, which made him very angry. But in the end, he was only convicted of dismembering a corpse and walked out of jail a couple years later to write this memoir, which I believe is probably a big part of what the movie is based on. This is the book. It's very well written and very interesting, and you can sort of see how this guy, gets trapped into the situation. And the descriptions of how Sekine would take care of the bodies and what he did as the people were dying is dead on. He was laughing while they were dying, and when he and his wife were chopping up the bodies, they would sing enka, which are kind of like Japanese country and western songs, and hum and joke, and had actually quite a good time dismembering the corpses. I mean, it sounds unbelievable. When I was still writing it as it was happening after they arrested him, I wrote an article about how they were humming and singing songs while chopping up the bodies, and my editor killed it because they're like, you know, that can't be true. With some of the other bodies, it's suspected that he actually fed the meat to his dogs. But we never wrote it in the paper because it was considered so offensive and that it would really hurt the feelings of the families. So, by November of 1994, the police know that Shima is the guy to get, maybe as early as October. They get an arrest warrant. They arrest Shima. Shima confesses to dismembering the bodies. He tells them where they burned the bodies, and very quietly around the New Year, while everyone in the mass media is taking a vacation, including myself, they went up to Guma, where they found pieces of teeth and bones and some other personal objects that belonged to the victims, and realized that they could make a case. They got an arrest warrant for Sekine again. They arrested him right around the beginning of 1995, and the case broke. Everyone thought that Sekine would deny the charges, but he confessed very quickly, probably realizing that they had a strong case, and with Shima cooperating with them, that, you know, the sane thing to do would be just confess. His wife did not confess. She would only admit to helping dismember the bodies, but not the actual killings. And in the subsequent court trials, you know, he insisted that she was the one who suggested the killings, and that he followed, and she tried to portray herself as someone who was not, you know, forced to help dismember the bodies, but wasn't part of the actual killings. But the final decision of the Tokyo courts in 2009 was that they both were responsible for premeditated murder, and they received the death penalty. And it seems impossible to be overturned at this point. If she is given the death penalty, or when she gets the death penalty, I think, rather than if, it'll be like one of the first females to be executed in Japan in, you know, 20, 30 years or something. And the last woman to be executed also was part of a husband and wife serial killer team in Hokkaido, if my memory serves me correctly. Once the two of them were caught, you know, the case moved very rapidly, even though it still took the police a lot of time to sort of get the facts right, determine how the poison was administered, collect evidence to prove that that these people had really been killed. For example, with Endo, there was very little physical evidence, I think, other than his gold-plated Dunhill lighter. I don't know what they had to prove that Wakui was killed, except that Wakui was his driver, and that Shima testified that Wakui, you know, died as well. The police say that Sekine handed sports drinks and a cap and a vitamin tablet to the victims, and that's how they died. There was other testimony to suggest that just like in the movie, they were given poison, strychnine-laced energy drinks, drank them and died. I think that's probably what happened, rather than taking, you know, who would take a capsule from this guy? But, you know, in Japan, people drink these stamina drinks all the time. You would think that the Yakuza boss would have known better than to drink this stuff, but apparently he didn't. And really, if Sekine hadn't killed that guy, he might have gotten away scot-free. You know, but the Yakuza take care of their own, and their methods of investigation do not necessarily follow legal procedure, making them very effective. When Takeda is currently in jail, but when he gets out, I'd like to meet him and shake his hand, because if it wasn't for him, this case wouldn't have been solved. Well, for him and Detective Sekiguchi, I mean, they really solved the case. The homicide division followed up. In Japan, the death penalty is not common. Japan is not Texas. And if you get the death penalty, there's many appeals that you can make before all appeals are exhausted. So even though the legal proceedings began in probably 1995, the death sentence itself becoming definitive with no more avenues of appeal took until 2009. It can take a very long time. So you can stay on death row a very long time if that's what you want. Some cases, like the case of Takuma in Osaka, who ran into an elementary school and started stabbing kids and killed a couple. He decided not to appeal. He was executed very quickly. Everyone was quite happy. In other cases, it can take a very long time. I met Sekine in 1994 when he was still running the pet shop. The first time I went as a customer, and he gave me this spiel about how if I bought a pair of Alaskan Malamutes and bred them for like $5,000 for the two of them, a special discount for me because I was a foreigner, that they would have puppies, and he would buy each one back for me from like $500, and that pretty soon I would be swimming in money. He talked about his time in Africa and his helicopter, and showed me his super fancy car, and he was very charismatic, very convincing. I mean, even though I knew the guy's a total shyster and a fraud, he can talk so fast, and he's quite charming in the way that sociopaths can be. Praising my Japanese abilities, saying, you're obviously a smart person, all the things that people want to hear. Then I was like, wow, this guy is slick. I can see how people fall for him. And he did have this incredible charisma. The second time I met him was at a dog show. This was when the investigation was already pretty much in the public domain. He was washing his dogs. He was with two Yakuza. I took some photos from a distance and some not so far away, and I went up to him and I said, people say that you've killed about 4 people. Do you think you're going to get the death penalty? And he said, I haven't killed anybody yet, but I might start with you. And I was like, whoa. And he said it in a joking manner, but that look in his eyes was like, yeah, this guy is a killer. I mean, I think that was the first time I met someone who I think that was the first serial killer I ever met. I met other people, in the course of the last 17 years of covering the Yakuza and organized crime in Japan who were killers. But he was the first one, and he was quite memorable. And, I mean, he definitely had this kind of strange aura about him. It was very powerful, almost Rasputin-like. And if he looked at you in anger, and I just wanted to see what an angry Sekine looks like. I mean, really fucking scary. And his wife too just seemed like a psycho as well. I mean, I only briefly talked to her. She was not particularly attractive, though I mean, that's another thing about Sekine. I mean, here's this guy, sort of a little chubby, bald-headed, always had, sort of the Don Johnson look, so it looked like he never could shave properly. Yet, he had this kind of animal magnetism that he had several lovers. She had a lover as well. And, she apparently had her entire back tattooed and was quite a howler and screamer and biter. There was a young Yakuza who was her lover. I talked to him, and he said that, while she was not particularly attractive, and that if she wasn't paying him a lot of money, he wouldn't be sleeping with her, she was actually quite good in bed. In the film, here's how it lines up in real life. Murata equals Sekine again, the pet breeder who killed the people. Murata's wife equals Kazuma, I think it's Hiroko, Sekine's wife, a younger wife. Tsutsui, his legal advisor, equals Endo, the Inagawa Kai boss. His driver, I think, which is Okubo. I've only got to see the movie once in the movie theaters, but his driver equals Wakui, the driver of Endo, Endo Daiko, and Shamoto, who plays a small tropical fish shop owner who gets embroiled in this and is made an accomplice, is the equivalent of Shima, who was Sekine's assistant and driver, who gets involved in the case and can't get out. He's also a combination of another partner that Sekine had named Arai Ryoji, who fled. In the movie, very briefly, there's a scene where a detective comes up and shows Shamoto a photo of one of Murata's former assistants who disappeared, and that also happened as well. Sekine again had an assistant early in his career who disappeared as well, probably because he knew too much or wasn't cooperative. That was one of the other missing people. That's basically the lineup you have. And of course, the police department guy that shows up for like one or two scenes is the Saitama Police Department. In the movie, when the police finally show up at the place where the bodies have been dismembered, it's like one car, but in real life it was like 20 cars and a forensic squad. I mean, it was a big case. Murder in Japan is a big deal. There aren't that many. Every time someone gets murdered, they set up a special investigative headquarters and devote a lot of manpower to it. I mean, there were a lot of detectives on this case. Where the movie deviates from reality are a couple spots. First of all, the real case is based on someone selling not tropical fish, but rare dogs. So, there's a difference between mammals and fish. Even I know that. The movie follows the actual story fairly closely until this scene on the bridge where Shamoto stabs Murata and stabs his wife and suddenly transforms himself into a cold-blooded serial killer who takes no gruff. At that point, it completely deviates from the true story and is no longer related at all. Up until that point, to this scene on the bridge, it is very realistic. Minor deviations are, it's not made clear that his legal advisor is actually a Yakuza himself. It's implied but not made clear. I write about this in detail here, but what became the critical piece of evidence in this case is that Arai Ryoji, who was a former employee of Sekine Gen, was compelled by the Yakuza to go talk to Shima. And on the tape, Shima says to Arai Ryoji, there's nothing to worry about, the body is invisible, which is a kind of mantra that you see Murata repeating in the film. The body is invisible, the body is in Guma. All I did was drive the car. I can't go to jail. And that piece of evidence, that tape, when given to the police, told them, this is the man we've got to get. Once we get Shima, we will solve this case. And that became the emphasis of the case. And that is what broke the case, that one tape, that the Yakuza coerced someone into secretly taping and then gave to the police. That's not in the film. But what is in the film is many times, like 4 or 5 times, you have Sekine saying, the body is invisible, the body is invisible, we'll make him invisible, or we'll make you invisible, which becomes like a code for, like, we can kill you too. And the same thing was said to Shima, the actual driver. We could make you disappear just as well. And his wife and kids were also threatened. So that is very realistic. You can see how this guy, through circumstantially and being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and being told you're now an accomplice, was forced to help out when he probably didn't want to. That comes from the actual tape itself. It comes from the actual court documents. Those are words that Sekine again actually used towards Shima, words that he used to describe why he could never be caught. Tomei ni shite yaru. Mo, aitsu wa tomei nan dakara daijoubu desu yo. Which means, oh, that bastard is invisible, so there's no problem. We're okay. Serial killings in Japan are rare. They may not be as rare as we think. Here's why. The police in Japan do autopsies on only 10% of cases that the police themselves have deemed suspicious deaths. If it is a suicide, they only do autopsies on 4%. This has become an issue because in the last couple of years there have been several cases where, let's say, there's one case now where a woman, I also believe, who from Saitama, her husband's kept mysteriously dying and she collected life insurance. They finally investigated one of them and figured out that he had been killed. But the previous deaths had been ruled accidental deaths or suicides. One way to disguise a murder or suicide is you give someone a sleeping pill, you put them in a car, you put charcoal briquettes in the car, you light it, and then it looks like they died from asphyxiation. And it's a popular way to kill yourself in Japan. So there may be a lot of serial killings in Japan that have gone undetected. And there have been other women serial killers in this country. There was Miyazaki Tsutomu, who killed many children in Saitama over a long period of time. Generally speaking, it's a very small country and the police are effective, so it's not easy for someone to go on a very long killing spree. And you also have serial killings which are like, basically one-stop serial killings, meaning that a guy goes into, like Takuma goes into a elementary school in Osaka and starts stabbing kids right and left and kills, 3 or 4 there on the spot. That's a mass murder. Whether you I guess you wouldn't really call that a serial killing. Or other ones where a guy drives his car into the pedestrian crowd at Akihabara and then starts stabbing people at random and kills several of them. Serial killings are rare in the country, and a case like Sekine again, where they were able to do it over a decade, extremely rare. But even in the last year, there have been a few cases of what appear to be serial killings over an extended period of time that went uncaught. And serial killings will almost guarantee you a death penalty. The unwritten rules of what constitutes a death penalty in Japan are 1 to 2 people, one person, usually life imprisonment, maybe 10 years if it's like in a fight, or you just lose your temper and do it. A premeditated murder is something else. If a Yakuza kills another Yakuza, the penalty is usually pretty light, because as the police say, that's not murder, that's property damage. But if you kill 2 people, you have a good chance of facing the death penalty. It's a flip of the coin. Are there extenuating factors? Are you young? Are you really sorry? Do you can cooperate with the police? But kill 3 or 4, you can be guaranteed the death penalty, even if you're insane. Takuma said that he went and killed these kids because he wanted to commit suicide but didn't have the courage to do it himself, and he wanted the state to put him to death. People like Miyazaki Tsutomu are just sick sadists who get away with it for as long as they can, and he tormented the families of the people he killed. I mean, he was a really evil person. You have the religious group Om Shinrikyo, which killed many people over a 3 or 4 year period of time, but mostly to protect their interest and keep the organization alive and to stop police investigations, including spreading saline poison gas on the subway system of Tokyo. Was probably the first actual act of biological terror ever perpetrated in any country. And that was a group of serial killers as well. Their motives were religious belief and a desire to protect their group and squelch opposition. I mean, historically, there have been a couple cases of sort of roving serial murders, right? Serial killers. They used to call them stranger murders. But in cases like Sekine again, it's not a stranger that he's killing. The reasons he killed these people is because that he would rather have them dead than go to jail for fraud. A pure motive is greed. And probably in killing the Yakuza boss, also self-preservation and anger as well as being shooken down. Probably didn't like that. But his motives weren't crazy. I mean, they weren't crazy serial killings. They were, as well as this woman who probably killed several of her husbands and collected the insurance money. The motive is profit. Homicide detectives in Japan say, all homicides can be divided into three reasons. What is it? Ona and kon okane. Ona is woman, right? I mean, it's a misogynist society, so it basically means any love affair. Enkon is either envy or anger or hatred, and then okane is money. All motives fit into all murders are committed for those three purposes. When you get like the crazy cults like Om Shinrikyo, or you get to sexual perverts like Miyazaki Tsutomu, that doesn't necessarily translate so well. But in a sense, his enjoyment is the motive. He's killing them because it gives him pleasure. Japan is a very safe country. I mean, the murder rates for this entire nation are probably lower than those of New York City. I mean, that's per year. That's why every homicide is national news. If somebody gets killed in Hokkaido, it's national news. Somebody gets, killed in Miyagi Prefecture, it's national news. Every murder is news, which makes it hard if you're like a reporter in Saitama, which actually had a fair number of murders. Every time there was a murder, it was a big deal. It would always go to the national paper. That should tell you what, it's not like the United States where, like murders are, one paragraph, murder is front page news, or at least the top of the national news for the day. Or it gets a certain amount of reportage. However, there is always a reluctance to, it makes the police look bad if the murder rates go up and the clearance rates don't go up as well. One of the ways that this can be avoided is by classifying a case as manslaughter rather than murder. This happened often when I was covering the 4th District in 1999 in Kabukicho. When a Chinese guy got killed, it would always be manslaughter. There was even a case where there was a Chinese guy, sort of a Chinese mafia affiliate who was, having a bowl of ramen. Some guy came in, spoke a word to him, stabbed him 7 times, left. Clearly an assassination. And I went there and I'm writing it up and I'm saying, okay, what is this being investigated? And the police are, this is being investigated as assault resulting in death. And I'm going but it sounds clearly like the guy was assassinated. Like that's murder, right? And he's like, they spoke a word. So clearly there was an argument and the argument resulted in death. And he's like, listen, we don't want to handle this as a murder because then we have to devote a lot of manpower to it. And we don't have the manpower to do this. So it's assault resulting in death. And that's one way they can get around it. The other thing is that, but due to the lack of manpower to do autopsies, a lot of cases that probably are murders go undetected. That has increasingly become a problem, and I think in the last 2 years there have been several very good investigative articles written about cases that were originally labeled as suicides or natural deaths turning out to be murder when someone confessed to it or they were finally caught doing their 4th or 5th crime. Well, one of the classic ways to kill someone in Japan and not get caught is disguise it as suicide, because as soon as it's a suicide, there's no real investigation and it gets swept under the rug. Well, because the autopsy rates for suicides, or what look like suicides, are 4%. So if you wanted to kill someone in Japan, if you make it look like a suicide, your odds of getting away with it are very good. The odds are on your side. Another bizarre statistic about Japan is that every year 80,000 people go missing. Every year 80,000 people are reported as missing. Now I don't know what the statistics are for the United States, so I have no means of corroborating. But like in this earthquake, there are now like 10,000 people missing. I mean, that's a huge number, but that's actually only 1/8 of the number of people that go missing every year in Japan. And by say go missing, those are the number of people that are reported to the police as being missed, as being missed. With the number of cases where the police are asked to do an investigation to see what happened to this person, and obviously they can't investigate them all. So there may be a lot more people being killed in Japan than we know about. I think a lot of with like older people, Yakuza kill them and take their inheritance, the life insurance. They killed and burned, body buried somewhere. I mean, I would say I would imagine a significant number of those people who are missing have been murdered. But there's also many reasons people want to leave Japan. You know, disappear. You have huge debts that you need to get out of. Run away with a younger woman. Run away with an older man. The actor who's playing Murata not only looks like Sekine Gen, he speaks like Sekine Gen. His dialogue sounds exactly like some of the things that Sekine Gen said perpetrating his crimes, and then that's come out in the court testimony. He managed to portray the same sort of animal magnetism and charm and charisma that Sekine had himself. When I was watching him, it was so eerie because it was almost like watching like Sekine Gen on the screen. He does a tremendous performance as the guy, and I mean, it was so real that it kind of creeped me out. I mean, it gave me shivers up the spine. It was like, whoa, that was really, really well done. Never met Shima, so I can't say if the actor portraying him is doing a good job at playing him. But you know, that aspect of the movie is really, really good. I mean, I wonder if the actor did research to portray him properly, but it's an amazing performance. And the movie, up until the point where it departs from the actual story, is a compelling, incredible drama. After that, it's sort of a different fish. I think that the movie could have had a serious impact on the way people view crime in Japan and other things if it had stuck closer to the story, but it departs so much from the real story towards the end of the film that I think that most people will not know that, you know, the 2/3 of the film is based on a real story. And there is not much coverage of the police investigation. The police play a very peripheral role in this film. And they look like a bunch, and they're made to look like a bunch of idiots as well, which, you know, doesn't, which I'm sure the police are not happy about. I think that it's very rare to see a movie based on a real crime that gets things so accurate and is so detailed. Probably one of the reasons this film was possible is because Sekine and his wife aren't going to be around to sue, because they're definitely going to be killed. You know, maybe they had to wait long enough to be sure that you know, there were you can't be charged with libel if the people who you're libeling are you know, 6 feet under.